what it did is it had two groups. The first group, the blue line, were 18 to 21-year-olds. The second group were 35 to 39-year-olds. And they were given 90 seconds to translate images into numbers using a code. So it's basic processing activity. And in the first round of the experiment, the same groups did two experiments. The first round, they were not interrupted. In the second round, they were interrupted. And they were interrupted by a phone call or a text message or an IM. So designed to mimic the typical interruptions. And what happened was, without distractions, the younger group did perform faster. They were able to do the decoding activity faster than the older group. But given interruptions, the performance of the younger group declined precipitously to a statistically insignificant point. And what the researchers concluded from this is that the reason that the older group was able to perform better on multitasking is because they had further developed brains, and two things happen as you get older. One is that neural cells that you don't use get pruned, they die. And the other is that pathways that get used a lot get strengthened or myelinated. And so that's called fluid intelligence. And so what that means is that the older group, because they had pruned and myelinated, they were better able to ignore the distractions than the younger group that didn't have the stronger connections and haven't pruned away. So everything's interesting. And so they were distracted. So this speaks to a larger point we usually dwell on a bit more, but it's a basic and really important concept that we sometimes forget. I'm constantly telling parents of high schoolers, don't just tell your kids to say no to Facebook. That just saying no to something that's as appealing as Facebook is an impossibility for them for many of them, because of their brain development. So adolescent brains are changing rapidly, and they're not adult brains. And they change in many ways, but the most important one for our conversation is here, of course. The prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to develop, and in females, it finishes or it completes its major development by the early 20s, and in males, not until the late 20s. So that's why college kids do so many silly things, because they're still, So what that means when the ability to override impulse is not fully developed, then the impulses are stronger and harder to resist. And so to just say no when you have a really active amygdala and a less developed prefrontal cortex is asking a lot of a kid.
And this will hopefully come back into play when we talk about community norms in a few minutes, because essentially you guys are their prefrontal cortexes right now, cortices. You guys are their prefrontal cortices. So the rules that you put on your kids with their input, of course, will help them develop those prefrontal cortexes in the way that you want to see them develop.
A little faster.
Yeah, we do.
So more on adolescence and their emotions.
I think we should just skip this because we're running out of time, but I should say that adolescents have super active amygdalas, and so everything is interesting.
And ditto. This is just, Facebook is really interesting from an emotional perspective.
So the other thing is that, you know how when you think that you might have gotten an email from that person that you emailed back, and you're like excited about it? Like anytime you do something that's pleasurable, you release a neurochemical called dopamine. Now dopamine is released when you do something rewarding so that you keep doing it again, so that you perpetuate the species, for example, or you eat good foods that aren't very hard to find, like salt or whatever. When dopamine is overactivated, that actually is what moderates addiction in any kind of way. So being on the internet is a little bit of an addiction, and I can feel it myself, and I can definitely see it in my students. When students are on all the time, or shifting between texting and IMing and a YouTube video and listening to their iPod at the same time, it's been called continuous partial attention, and it's exciting, and it's wonderful, and it's dopamine releasing, but it's also stressful. And anything that's stressful causes an increase in the amygdala, which then helps perpetuate chronic cortisol release, and which also ties in with adrenaline release. This has been called techno-brain burnout because high cortisol release chronically actually leads to cell death in the hippocampus, that I learned part of the brain.
And again, why this is deceiving to young people or people our age who experience this is that in the short term, the hippocampus actually grows, but it's the chronic release that then causes the cell death. Right. So in the short term, it's like, wow, fantastic, I can remember everything, this is so intense.
So like bursts of cortisol once a week or so. Good. Chronic is actually the brightness of the screen and the brightness of the ambient light. So one of the ways that you feel tired is because a portion of your brain called the pineal gland releases a chemical called melatonin. And the melatonin interacts with your brain in a way that makes you feel sleepy. Melatonin gets suppressed by light. And you can see that the amount of light actually will suppress the melatonin to greater or lesser amounts. Now these arrows right here represent the best guess that I can find as to the luminance coming off of computer screens. So since I had found some of this research, I'm a night person naturally, which actually means that my melatonin